have seen the worst, and there is nothing left for me to hate, so I can lay me down, my brothers, on the ground. I bled today until Coyote comes to raise me up and carries me
Hello, welcome to the Scottish Rugby podcast brought to you by the Scottish Rugby blog. I am Jonny McGinty in the hot seat for this evening. We are streaming live, which I'm assuming you know if you're watching the stream, but you might not if you're listening to the pod, on Facebook, on YouTube and on Twitch. We are also available, which I assume you know if you're listening to the pod, but you might not if you're watching the stream, on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and basically anywhere else you can get your podcasts. We are also, if you're so inclined, available on Patreon, patreon.com/Scottish Rugby Podcast, where for basically about the same as the cost of one of those foil packs of either celebrations or miniature heroes. Can you tell I've been buying presents for my kids' nursery this week? You will get access to our super secret Facebook group. You'll get an extra pod every week where we are a little bit looser with our opinions and our language, and you'll be able to contribute to the Hands in the Ruck section through the Facebook group as well. You might also, if you're extremely unlucky and you end up in the Patreon, be asked to join us on the pod from time to time, which is exactly what happened to Alan McDonald. How are you, Alan?
I'm good, Jonny. How's yourself?
I'm very good. Thank you very much. I'm also joined for the second time by Mark Riley, who I heinously and incorrectly until very recently assumed was an Edinburgh fan, but he's not. How are you, Mark?
I'm very well, thank you. I'm very much a fan of all Scottish rugby. I'm being very diplomatic.
The Cameron Black gambit.
Yes, that's the one I'm going for. Yeah.
A bit of borders fence sitting.
Yes.
We're more than used to that around here. I wouldn't worry too much about it. We will jump straight in. We have a lot of news to get to, a lot of games to cover. Very, very busy week for Scottish rugby this weekend, starting with, we're not going to go into too much detail on this, the under-20s who, for some reason, are playing a friendly at the Hive against Wales at 2:30 tomorrow afternoon, Mark. Do we expect to see anything seismic happen?
Genuinely, I don't think so. I mean, it's a good run out for the lads, but from what I've been able to pick up, it's simply a gash friendly because somebody from the WRU and somebody from the SRU thought it would be fun. It's out of kilter with absolutely everything else in the season, but good luck to the lads. I hope they enjoy it.
It's a strange one, but yeah, you're absolutely right. It's a chance for a bit of a run out. It's a bit of a warm-up for the Hive tomorrow afternoon as well, because we have got the kick-off of the Celtic Challenge tomorrow night at Hive. Glasgow against Edinburgh, I guess technically Edinburgh against Glasgow. And the big news, I think, coming out of that this week is that most, if not all, of the Celtic Challenge is going to be on free-to-air TV. So BBC Sport Online is carrying that one tomorrow. Teams for both are out, but I think what we'll do, once we've had a quick chat about the coverage, is we'll do something a little bit different rather than go through the teams. I've asked Mark and Allan to come up with a one to watch for the game tomorrow night, for someone to keep your eye on. But I think before we do, Alan, it's a big deal that we're getting so much free to air for the Celtic Challenge, you would imagine.
Yeah, I mean, visibility and representation gets people playing. I'm old enough to have been playing age grade rugby around about the 1990 Grand Slam, and in the unfashionable area of Ardrossan for Ardrossanakis. And I remember getting an onslaught, just an influx of players coming in, having been made interested in rugby by the Grand Slam and the 91 World Cup. And I think, obviously women's rugby is a great growth area, and getting on free-to-air telly is great, and it's rugby for everyone on free-to-air telly.
Definitely. Yeah.
Absolutely. To put, I guess, a bit of a devil's advocate spin on it, you guys have both got daughters a bit older than my daughter. She's not quite at the sitting down and watching a game yet, whereas your two obviously are a bit older. You'll maybe know this a little bit better than me. Do you think free-to-air on the BBC Sport website is the avenue that we should be going down? Do you think that younger people are more attracted to different forms of media, Mark, or do you think sort of any coverage is good coverage?
I think both is the answer. I think any coverage is good coverage. I think it's good to have it on free to air, but I think you're right. I think free to air probably suits people, Gen X types like myself, rather than the younger people. I mean, the way my daughter's 22 and the way she consumes media is very, very different. She wouldn't care if she had a TV license. She's online all the time. I think they get a far bigger impact through the likes of the media that the women's squad share on TikTok and things like that. That's what my daughter sees. She'll watch the match, but probably only because I've got it on.
Yeah, Alan, Rona Lloyd's TikTok obviously has been a highlight for the last couple of years. We've seen what's possible with Bristol obviously signing Alona Mayer on the back of her Instagram following, and they've recruited a full-time social media marketer for the 3 months that she's here. So do you think, I think I know how I feel about this, do you think women's rugby does a better job than men's rugby of kind of engaging with that sort of content?
Well, I mean, I don't know. There's people jumping out of bins to surprise Doohan. But yes, obviously, the women's rugby does a lot better job than that. The men's rugby is okay, but it's a wee bit complacent because it's currently the primary rugby vehicle, so it's the one that gets it gets views anyway. It should be getting more views and trying to get more views, but I think it's a bit complacent what it's there. Women's rugby's obviously had to fight for their place at the table and had to fight for their viewership share. So I think they've been much more innovative and less hidebound than men's rugby. But I think if it's on the Sports Scotland website, you're right. Younger generations sort of interact through sort of apps and. God, I sound about 70 saying that. They're on those talk texts.
The apps and the TikToks.
The apps and the TikToks and the whats. But no, in the MyFace and the Spacebook. But no, I think they will still be able to watch, from the Sports Scotland website. They can watch through iPlayer and things like that. So it doesn't matter if they don't watch a telly. They can still access the game, and I think that's what's important.
100%. So moving on then to on the pitch tomorrow night, we are obviously hoping everybody will be tuning in to make sure that they see the game. We want, the more numbers watching the games, the more chance there is of more better coverage coming. So we are imploring everybody to stick it on. When they do, who are we looking out for? I will start with an absolutely unashamed homer pick. The Edinburgh tight head Molly Pullman. She is a How of Fife product. She made a massive impact in this exact same fixture off the bench last season. I hadn't seen Molly for a few years before we went up to Hive last year for the very first Celtic Challenge Glasgow Edinburgh game, and she is a demon. Like, extremely powerful front rower, ridiculously strong ball carrier. Reminds me a lot of another Scotland tight head who I think we'll be talking about quite soon. Has been involved in the age grade setups and just is absolute dynamite to watch. So I'm looking forward to seeing her get the start tomorrow. Mark, who are you? I know you're going to the game. Who are you keeping your eyes on?
Funnily enough, I've picked one from both teams because clearly I can't read a simple set of instructions. But funnily enough, on following the adage that forwards decide who wins games and backs only decide to score, I went for 2 forwards, and front row on the Edinburgh side is the hooker Ayla Ronald. She's been in and about the scene for a wee while. She's only I think she's only 21, but she played in the under-20s Six Nations just gone. I think she's very mobile. She's getting talked about a lot, which I think is really encouraging. And there's talk a lot of the work she's doing with the likes of Fraser Brown and such like. And part of the reason I'm so interested is that Lana Turner, love her to death. Lana's 32 next month. I don't want to see a Scotland team without Lana, but at some point it's going to come, right? So I think Ayla Ronald is possibly the next off the bench after Ellis Martin. So I think watching her is probably a good one for tomorrow.
Do you want to give us your Glasgow as well?
Yeah, the other one was actually, again, not so much a homer, but something that ties into what we were talking about expanding the game. The reason I'm going is that I have a friend who's not a big rugby watcher who pinged me earlier in the week. She's from Strathaven, and Poppy Clarkson, who is tight head prop. She plays for Biggar. She's played under 20, I think, for Scotland, but has only just come into the Celtic Challenge setup, and she's due to get her first match for Glasgow off the bench. So I'll be very interested in watching her. But I think it's interesting, the expansion of the game and the fact that somebody's asking me, can you come along to the game? Because I want to see this girl who I've known grow up through coming through Strathaven and on to Biggar, and then now playing for Glasgow. So I think that's all good stuff. So I'll be watching her as well. So a tight head and a hooker.
Brilliant. Alan, there's 3 front rows left if you want to pick one, or are you going to mix it up a little bit?
Well, I'm going to mix up a little bit, but actually not in the same way. So I'm going to go for another shameless homer pick, because Ailey McGilvery is a Highland girl. She's from Granton and Spey. She was under 18 when my daughter was playing under 15, so I've got to see Ailey play a few times. She's playing blindside. She's just come back from, I think, 3 seasons in the States at Life University in a rugby scholarship there, having been Scotland under 18s. So I'm really looking forward to seeing how her game's developed in that time, and I'll be shamelessly cheering her on because she's a good egg as well.
Good stuff. One last, I guess, shameless homer is that former pod contributor Lisa Martin is in the Glasgow squad this year. So she starts at 12 for Glasgow, and obviously we'll be keeping an eye on her too. Once we get past the Celtic Challenge, then we're on to, I guess, what would be the draw of the weekend, which is the 1872. One of the biggest ever 1872 games. We had the news come down the other day that there are now over 25,000 tickets sold for Hampden on Sunday afternoon, which is huge. Alan, I'm maybe slightly concerned that this time last year we were hearing about the over 30,000 that would sold for Murrayfield, but we're not hearing anything about that yet. So do you think we're going to get 2 huge games, or do you think Murrayfield suffers a bit at Hampden being so busy on Sunday?
I have a slightly different view. I wonder if it's they're crowing about Hampden because they got quite a lot of pushback from fans. There wasn't a lot. There was quite a lot of comment on the pod as well about a Sunday game being moved to Hampden at kind of short notice, run up to Christmas, difficulties getting there and away. So I wonder if they're sort of saying how many have been sold as almost a kind of counter to that, and to justify their decision. But what we don't know is how many they needed to sell to break even on it. Because Hampden will not come cheap, presumably.
No. And Alan, I know you're new around here, but there's absolutely no issue with dragging John Anderson for his nonsense opinions. So if you want to just call out the fact that it was him that complained so much about it being moved to a Sunday afternoon, you're more than welcome to, because I certainly will. Mark, I know you're heading over on Friday. Are you heading to Hampden on Sunday, or will you be watching from home?
No, I'm not. I'll be watching from home on Sunday. Yeah, it's. I did toy with the idea of going over, but yeah, events took a turn. My daughter's just back, so I'm not going to take a day out from to go and do rugby stuff. But
Yeah. No.
I think it's great. They sold so many tickets, and I watched the game at Hampden, Scotland, Australia, years ago. I can't remember exactly the year. I think it was the early 2000s, probably. And I thought it was a good stadium. I quite enjoyed it for the rugby. I've never been to a football match there, but yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing how it turns out. 25,000's a good number, you know.
It's a decent number. I'm looking forward to it. The last time I was at Hampden was to watch my little brother-in-law play a schools cup final, and I think we must have been one of about 85 people there. So we're taking him with us on Sunday to go back. So yeah, it should be good. I'm looking forward to it. Some nice stuff springing up around it as well. So quite a few local clubs opening up and inviting fans in and things. So hopefully a decent atmosphere, and we will look forward to it. One person who we will not be seeing is Stafford McDowell. He is on a 3-week ban now after he was cited for contact with the eye area in Glasgow's game against Toulon on Sunday afternoon. I'll be perfectly honest, I did not see it happen. And I think, Mark, you mentioned seeing one of the Toulon players get treatment, which I think kind of vaguely rings a bell. People who have seen it said that they think it looked more like a rugby incident. And Mark, I've never really seen Stafford McDowell as that sort of player. Do you think it's something to worry about, or is it just one of these things?
I don't believe so. I think I even posted on Blue Sky when I heard about it yesterday that, you know, that there are 2 or 3 people you could pick in that Glasgow squad and go, yeah, I can see him being a little bit over exuberant. But I don't believe Stafford McDowell's one of them. I think it's a rugby incident. It's purely accidental, but contact with the eye is sacrosanct. So I think the 3-week ban's probably about right. Reading the stats, I think accidental. If I remember correctly, accidental contact with the eye is 4-week starting point. So he's got that and had it reduced probably for. I haven't seen the edict yet, but I suspect he's got that and probably had it reduced for good behaviour, previous good behaviour record, etc., etc. So I think, and after seeing the incident, I'm not surprised he was banned. I'm just glad it's been treated as an accidental.
And Alan, it's not exactly a position where Glasgow are in a lot of strife depth-wise anyway. Do you think they will struggle for? I mean, it's 2 big games, the 2 1872 games, and then the visit of Racing 92 in the Champions Cup. Do you think Glasgow are going to struggle, or do you think the cover there is sufficient to get us through 3 weeks?
I think they've got cover, but I suppose he's a player that they do go to and do rely on in a lot of situations, you know, so they will manage and there's cover, but they'll also miss him, which it sounds like I'm impaling myself on the fence, but I think you can't help but miss a player of his calibre. Yeah, and I think 3 weeks was fair. He's right. I mean, I didn't see it at the time. I've seen it now on X because everything like that's put on X these days, isn't it? And it's a kind of wrestle, and you know, he's got one hand on the bottom of the ball, and one hand comes across the other player's head, and I suppose it is a bit reckless, and an accidental poke in the eye still hurts us. You know, even if it is accidental. So I'm with you, Mark. I think 3 weeks feels about fair.
Yeah, no, I think that's pretty much as sensible as an outcome as we have kind of come to expect from rugby disciplinary at the moment. A couple of pieces of contract news coming through this week as well. 2 players that are sort of in quite different points of their Scotland journey. The first one is Ben Muncaster on a 2-year extension with Edinburgh. He's another person who plays in a very crowded position in the back row at Edinburgh, but he's someone that Edinburgh fans are certainly very excited about. He's been in a couple of Scotland squads, despite the fact that he's not really had a lot of national team minutes yet, but I think the feeling certainly at the Hive is that he could end up being a fairly serious part of the Scotland team, Mark. So getting him in for another 2 years at this point in his career, I guess, makes a lot of sense for Scotland and for Edinburgh.
Yeah, I think so. I think Muncaster has a potentially quite high ceiling. He's got all the skills. He's big. He's got a kind of nasty aggressive streak that you really need in the back row. And I think Muncaster's got a little bit of that going on. And it's something that I think Scotland particularly have lacked. Jamie Ritchie carries it very well. I think Muncaster could be part of that. I think Crosby's the other one that's got a bit of that nasty streak. But no, I'm glad to see him sign. I mean, he's only 23. He's got a future, a couple of years. I think a couple of years will be enough to tell whether he's one of these people that's really going to break into the international scene. If we don't know by the time he's 25, then the answer is probably no.
Yeah. And at the other end, then, I guess, of the Scotland career scope, as well as being at the other end of the M8, Alan, the big, I suppose, signing news this week was that Xander Fagerson is extended at Glasgow. Possibly, for my money, one of the most underrated Scotland players. I think the abuse that Xander gets online a lot of the time is completely unwarranted when you're talking about probably one of the top 5, if not top 3 tight heads in the world. And I think sealing him down for a couple of years at Glasgow is a massively important piece of business, you would have to say.
Yeah, I'm usually okay with our senior players going to earn a bit more money abroad, letting other players come through. But you're right. I think Xander, if something happens to Xander, we're in trouble. You know, it's as simple as that. So having him at a Scottish team, having him where he's settled, happy, and his minutes are managed, in that he plays 80 minutes of most games, that's I think that's good, particularly in such a high attrition position as tight head. And he's played a lot of rugby because he came through young.
Yeah. You actually forget that Xander still is not that old. I mean, he was, I think, one of our youngest ever caps at prop, and he's now been on a Lions tour. He's been involved in a Lions test environment. He's well over 50 caps for Scotland. Yeah. I think you cannot overstate how important a player Xander Fagerson is, and I think you're absolutely right, Alan. Keeping him in the Scotland setup where we can kind of look after him a bit is going to be crucial, because there is not that much depth coming through at the moment. Somebody had a stat, I think we spoke about it the other week, that there is not a single professional Scottish qualified tight head under the age of 23 anywhere in the world, which is it's either 23 or 25. An absolutely terrifying stat. We need to go and find the exact details and maybe pop it out later, because that terrified me. So I think you're right. We kind of need to protect Xander as much as we possibly can.
We just
need to move on to the... Sorry, Alan.
We just need the person in the SRU that is tracing the diaspora of Scottish grannies across the world to find someone playing prop. That's all we need to do.
Well, all the Scottish grannies in the world now know that you could get a couple of free flights off of Skyscanner if you send your kids to play for Scotland. So we'll stick that on the back of all the adverts. We'll move on to the games just past. We'll wrap up the public part of the pod with a little bit of a discussion on those two. We will do our predictions for the 1872 and talk a little bit more about that once we get onto the Patreon. But we obviously had 2 fairly important rounds of European rugby last weekend. Friday night, Edinburgh, their first home European game against Bayonne. That was a close game at halftime, Mark, and I think that was a big deal for Edinburgh, because when they conceded 3 penalties in 4 phases with the clock in the red in their own 5-metre line, and Bayonne went back to the corner, when Edinburgh sacked that maul and kept them out, that's huge. That's a big step forward for Edinburgh. Yes. Is that something that Edinburgh have been missing?
Yeah, I think so. Absolutely. I think in the past they'd leaked a try there, and suddenly it's a different game in the second half. I think that result was huge for Edinburgh psychologically. To beat them by 50 points to 12 at the end is a huge statement for Edinburgh, and it makes this weekend's games even more interesting, right? Edinburgh's big thing now is stringing a few of these together, though. I mean, they did. That was a fantastic win for them. To be honest, I thought they would win, but I wasn't expecting that kind of scoreline. So now, if they can string a few of those together, maybe talking about a different proposition.
Yeah, 100%. And Alan, Mark's touched on it there a little bit. That's now 2 50-point wins in a row at home for Edinburgh. That's, two massive performances, albeit the Benetton one maybe a little bit more seat of the pants than Friday night was. A decent bonus point loss in Gloucester in Europe. You'd be hoping for more, but we'll come on to it in a wee minute. You can never turn down a bonus point loss. What the big key now for Edinburgh is to win an away game, which hasn't come for them for a while. Obviously, Sunday they are theoretically the away team, but it's a lot closer to a neutral venue. You'd have to think there's a decent Edinburgh travelling support. It's a different game to anything really that we would have played in any of the other leagues. What do you think, Alan, success looks like for Edinburgh on Sunday afternoon?
I don't know. So I always get really excited about the 1872 Cup, and then it's usually a really, really turgid, hard-fought affair because the players know each other so well from international camps, etc. Would it be facetious to say success for Edinburgh is scoring more points than Glasgow? Genuinely, I think it doesn't matter how they do it. In fact, to an extent, winning, obviously a massive win for Edinburgh would be great, but if they manage to score more points than Glasgow, losing bonus point, yeah, if they're close, Glasgow have been the better side indisputably, and I don't say that with any particular East-West bias, despite my accent. But I think if they're within touching distance of Glasgow, that is okay. But they're going to want to win.
Yeah. And Mark, I guess last thing on Edinburgh, and it kind of comes into Glasgow and how things are going to go on Sunday afternoon a bit as well. We've spoken so many times about both of the pro teams and about the national team and about the psychological element and how Scottish teams seem to have this thing where they just crumble when the pressure's on. We had said that maybe Glasgow are past that. I think that final stand in the first half on Friday night proves that Edinburgh are kind of passing it as well. Do you think we're at a point now where we now don't have to worry about that anymore? Is this the Aaron Walsh effect? We spoke massively about him when he first came over to work with the national team. Are we finally getting there? Can we stop saying we're going to fall apart at every sign of difficulty for all of the teams?
That's a huge question. Yeah, thanks. I think Glasgow, as an organisation, as a unit, are through it. They've proven that. I think the end, and not so much by, what they did in last weekend was great, but I think what they did at the end of last season, away to Munster and then away to the Bulls in the semi and the final, I think that shows that they can handle the pressure. I think if Edinburgh can start doing that back to back and away, then that's one thing. I don't think a couple of results are showing that. I think it's looking like steps in the right direction, which is great. But I don't think we can say after a couple of good results, and they have been good results, I don't think we're quite saying that they've turned the corner yet. I think a little bit more continuity. I'd like to see that.
Moving on to Glasgow, Sunday afternoon, Glasgow away this week in Toulon in a ridiculous atmosphere. I thought it looked amazing. The Glasgow fans who were there all saying that had a really nice welcome from a lot of local clubs, loads of really good stuff to do, got involved in a lot of stuff. On the pitch, that was a riot Sunday afternoon. The team sheet came out on Friday, and my initial thought was, I looked at the 15 names on the team sheet, and I was a bit like, oh, we're giving French teams a taste of their own medicine with this team we've sent for an away game in France in the Champions Cup. But then you see the bench, and I think a big point of difference in that game on Sunday was that Glasgow's own version of the bomb squad coming on was huge. I think the guys who started did a great job of keeping the score close enough that when Xander came on, when Rory Sutherland came on, when George and Tom Jordan came on, that the game was still there to be won, and we were bringing on some serious firepower. Allan, you'd have bitten somebody's hand off for 2 points from that game at the start of the week, I think. Was that a fair return, or should Glasgow have been expecting more?
I think Glasgow it's almost Schrodinger's result in that they would have been delighted with 2 points, but they are gutted not to have 4. I think it's one of these results whereby you would have taken it beforehand, but you're left looking at a what if, and Glasgow could have won, and I don't think they would have changed anything they'd done. I think they picked the team they did with the bench they did for a reason. Players coming back, managing minutes, etc. Giving players like Jerry Guntabeju, my apologies if I got that wrong, a chance and the confidence of a start. I think it's really important. But yeah, just what if, man? What if?
It is, and it's a weird one to be saying we played really well and that was amazing to get 2 points, which is a massive return. But actually, we would have said no to 4 points, and we were in with a shout of it. Mark, we are now obviously starting to look at how the qualification is going to go now for the next stage of the Champions Cup. Who's going where? Obviously because of the crazy format, I think it was getting banded about at the weekend that one of either Toulouse or UBB are going to be at best 5th seed. So Glasgow have got some work to do to get themselves up there, but 7 points from the first 2 matches. Racing 92 did not look that scary against Sale at the weekend. Glasgow have got them at home and then down to the Stoop for Harlequins, who Glasgow very, very nearly beat down there in a knockout game last year. How important do you think a home last 16 game is for Glasgow, and do you think it's an achievable target for them?
I think it's an achievable target, and I think it's really important. You're really kind of, Glasgow have developed a kind of Fortress Scotstoun mentality, and as much as they do have this strength of character when they seem to be able to go away and win big games away, and I don't think that will hold any fear for them. I think having it at home would be a damn sight easier, right? I think you don't want to see beating Racing 92 as a given, but I can't help wondering if Racing 92 will even bother turning up to Scotstoun, if you know what I mean. I think the big match for us is going to be Quins at the Stoop. I think that's a whole other game. If we can some way contrive a win there, then I think that will be a huge step for Glasgow.
Yeah, and I think we kind of saw last year in the Champions Cup how important as many home games as possible are. Glasgow obviously, as you say, aren't scared of going away. Went away to Thomond Park and then went away to the Bulls in the URC. But we saw some of those French stadiums at the weekend, and that is a whole different kettle of fish. Where Glasgow were in Toulon was scary looking enough, but you look at places like La Rochelle and Toulouse, and those are really, really difficult places to play.
More
on the other end of it, Allan.
More scary than the Lotus Versfeld.
I think
that's not
the Fortress it was. I think, and you know, Saints turned them over there. I think it is scary, but I think at Loftus, it's, you know, everything. It's the mystique, it's the atmosphere, it's the altitude, it's all the things that they make a big deal of before you get there. But some of those French stadiums where they're full with 35,000 people are not as big as Loftus and loud, and you know, it's a whole different thing to get your head around. You know, the setting of Loftus Versfeld is one thing. Yeah, but the atmosphere in some of those French stadiums is something else.
Yeah, I take your point, but one of the reasons that Lotus isn't the fortress that it was is that Glasgow went there and won in the final. And the Glasgow players will be a bit gallous as a result of that. And I think opposition teams you might outwardly be like, oh, once we get them in front of our fans, etc., etc. But, you know, in the back of their minds, they will be, this Glasgow team have gone to Thomond Park and they've gone to Lotus Versfeld and they've won in knockout games. And that's a great thing to have that's seeded out in the opposition players, because if you start to get the upper hand, then that just starts to grow, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think there is a lot to be said for that.
My favourite
talking. Go on, Mark.
No, I was just going to say at the end of that game, and it's all something about the atmosphere at Loftus, is the picture that they published after the game of Jamie Batty standing underneath the big sign you got to run under that says "Altitude it matters," and Jamie Batty just pointing and laughing. I just thought that was wonderful, absolutely fabulous.
I went to the trophy tour when they came back, and Wombat was still a little bit worse for wear. So the trophy was that the Tuesday night, I think, and he still had his sunglasses on. And I said to him, "Wombat, are you hungover?" And he said, "Not yet." I was like, "All right." He was having a great time. He really enjoyed it. Edinburgh at the other end of that, Alan. I think a lot of us looked at Edinburgh's team that went down to Gloucester last week and thought, all right, well, we can see which competition Edinburgh are focusing on. Mm-hmm. They've now got a massive win at home. They've got 6 points from their first 2 games. Do you think that we're going to see an Edinburgh team that fancies a crack at the Challenge Cup, or are we going to go back to a bit of more of a development squad to go away in the next games?
I mean, I think Sean Everett is probably drinking in the last chance saloon this season, so I think he's going to throw everything at whatever he thinks he's got a chance of doing best in. And if fortune has dealt him better cards in the Challenge Cup, I don't think he'll be against sending out a team for that. Would be my suspicion.
Okay, very last word before we wrap it up, and we'll talk about 1872 on Patreon. Let's have a one-word answer based on that then. Mark first, and then you, Alan. Would the Challenge Cup save Sean Everett?
Depends.
that is definitely fence sitting. Alan?
Maybe. I mean, theoretically it would save him, but you know, it's a bit like Louis van Gaal being sacked after the win in the FA Cup. Is it enough? And I think I'm with Mark. I think a scrappy win without any development in the squad, if there's a credible alternative that's interested, Toby Booth, then I think I have a suspicion that Sean Everett might not be saved even if he won the Challenge Cup.
Yeah, I think if he wins, genuinely, and all joking aside, if he wins and they still come out towards the bottom half of the URC, then I don't think he's safe. The URC is fundamentally the bread and butter. Challenge Cup will be a nice flashy thing to have in the cabinet, but it's not enough, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, Cardiff have won it.
Excellent. Listen, that will do us for the news and for last week's games. If you want to hear about the 1872 as much as we can talk about it so far, stick around for the Patreon. We'll get into the Hands in the Ruck. It's going to get a little bit looser from there as well. But for those of us who are non-Patreons, thank you very much for joining us, and we will speak to you. Oh, I was going to say next week, but probably not next week because it's Christmas. We'll maybe speak to you after both of the 1872 games are finished, but for just now, it is goodbye from me, and it's goodbye from Mark and Allan.
Cheers.
Bye.
Let me get rid of some of these. See if I can remember which ones I get rid of.